This is the Isaiah Project, continuing with its series, Event and Text in the Early First Isaiah, Part 2, the Event Narrative, Chapter 7. In our prior presentation, we looked at poetic elements of the Isaiah scroll, which allowed us to identify a major literary unit, Chapter 3 through 12. I have suggested that we might call this unit Proto Isaiah, as it seems to have served as the original impulse for the great Isaiah text as we know it. In our last talk, we looked at the poetic character of its opening, chapter 3 and 4. In this talk, we turned our attention now to the center of this unit, around which its content has been arranged. This takes us to the opening of chapter 7, which is a historical narrative of an event that took place shortly after Ahaz ascended the throne of Judah in 736 BCE. The historical narrative is not a common occurrence in the Isaiah text, though there are two examples of this. In chapter 20, there is a brief narrative of a prophetic enactment by Isaiah in relationship to the Assyrian attack on Ashdod, 716. The second is the longer narrative, chapter 36 through 39, which covers the Isaiah role in the concluding years of the reign of King Hezekiah, roughly from about 705 to 687, when Hezekiah died. This extended narrative is shared with the historian of the Deuteronomic school, which has published it in its history, 2 Kings chapter 16:20. And this raises the question for us of who was dependent upon whom. We will save that to a later discussion. But for now, I would point out the narrative in chapter 7 is quite unlike those Deuteronomy histories, which are based on sources, for example, the annals of the kingdom of Judah. The Isaiah historian, on the other hand, is based on experience. He is working with a first-hand relationship with the event and with those who participated in it. The account in chapter 7 begins with the phrase, "as it came to pass in the days of Ahaz," which is at home in prophecy as opposed to history, where the practice would be to date that event in reference to the years of a particular reign. When Ahaz ascended the throne of Judah, the northern kingdom was led by King Pekah. Pekah set aside the northern kingdom's long-standing enmity with Syria and joined it in an alliance against Assyria, led by King Rezin of Damascus. The league between Samaria and Damascus was dictated by the realpolitik of the time. As the ascending empire of Assyria, the first of its kind on the world stage, was a threat to both kingdoms. They pressed Ahaz to join them, threatening war and conspiring to replace him with a king who would do their bidding if he would not join them. What actually happened is unclear. The Isaiah text says enigmatically they marched on Jerusalem to wage war against it, but could not. We might imagine some skirmishes, some conspiracies with factions in and around Judah and Jerusalem. The opening years of any reign are shaky, so it must have been doubly disconcerting. We have pointed out in the previous talk that Ahaz had followed the long reign of Uzziah, who had continued through his son, first as a co-regent, and then as, after his father's death, Jotham as king in his own right, but still under the control of his father's counselors. Ahaz, on the other hand, was surrounded by youthful counselors anxious for their turn. The elders of the prophetic school would have found themselves without the previous channels through which they had communicated and could communicate now about their growing concern of the geopolitical situation. That made the school turn to a youthful member of their community, Isaiah, to serve as their messenger to the youthful king Ahaz, and to seek out a public occasion on which their message might be delivered. According to the narrative, the king went out to examine the spring of Gihon, that crucial source of Jerusalem's water. This resonates with the issue of a sufficient supply of water raised in the opening chapter of 3 and anticipates the tunnel dug during the reign of the king's son, Hezekiah, which connected the Gihon spring with the Pool of Siloam in the lower city by means of an impressive tunnel carved through the bedrock on which Jerusalem sat. When Ahaz visited the spring, its waters flowed down a conduit that ran alongside the outside wall of the city's east wall. The prophetic school used this public outing, connected with the security of the city, to deliver its message to the king, which of course they were convinced was God's message. The message they sent begins with the charge to listen, Hash Shamar, and to be calm, Ba Shakat. And the content of the message begins with words of assurance. Do not fear. Do not let your heart be troubled. Al Tayyira Leberka Al Yarak. These words will resonate throughout the Isaiah text, and with those who have made the Isaiah text central to their own mission, not least of which, of course, is the mission that comes with the gospel. These are words that were given to Isaiah to speak as he greeted the young king Ahaz. The message continues with an assurance that the two principals who are pressing the king to join them, Rizin and Pekah, would soon be soldering stumps, burnt out has-beens. They were not the problem, for in a brief time they would be no more. The verbal message is reinforced by the presence of the prophet's young son. He bears the name which is the embodiment of the school's thought and of the message itself. The boy's name is Sha'ar Yeshuv. Those remaining shall turn. This is like the children of the prophet Hosea, whose bear names that are messages. But in this case, they are signs of hope, where in the former case, they were signs of lament. Hosea's first son is named Jezreel, after the place where Israel's king, queen mother, and the king of Judah had been slain by Jehu, truly a place where blood was mingled with blood. The daughter was named Lo Ramakmah, no mercy, and a final son, Lo Ami, not my people. The name of Isaiah's son, on the other hand, you see, is the message of hope. The turn is not turning back, but turning around to a new future. The prophetic school, profoundly loyal to the house of David, thinks in terms not simply of Judah, but of Judah with Israel. And they're convinced that whatever loss will come about, even if it reduces them to a tenth, Yashar, it would still be enough, would still be a remnant, Sha'ar, who would continue the future of Israel as God willed. The message cautions Ahaz, if you will not believe, then you will not be faithful. This plays on the Hebrew word amen. Im lo, ta'amenu, kilo ta'amenu. The problem in the eyes of the prophetic school is not what Jerusalem or Judah would do right now in the short run, but what they would become in the long run. The world order was being transformed by the rise of the imperial Assyrians. Not to change would be to assure yourself not to exist. Israel and Judah's role as kingdoms would be seriously limited and then eventually done away with, and its future would lie in becoming an Amen community, which translates a faith community. This course of transformation is traced throughout the entire Isaiah scroll, which will take place over the next 300 years. Ahaz's disbelief, of course, was expected. The prophetic school held a basic doctrine already expressed in a text that would eventually find its place in what we know as chapter 6. Hearing they will not hear, and seeing they will not comprehend. For this reason, Isaiah went equipped with a sign. In spite of Ahaz's protestation that he would not test God, the sign is given in terms of yet another child. This child was soon to be born of a young woman, and his name would be Emmanuel, God with us. The child is a reflection of an altered state of Israel's existence, and it indicates that the prophecy will be fulfilled in a short time, before the child knows how to reject evil and choose good. In other words, in a matter of months, not years. It will come as no surprise that this text has resulted in a heated dispute between Christians who take this as a messianic prophecy to be fulfilled in a distant future, and for the mother to be a virgin, and Jews who take this as a prediction of a historic event that would soon be fulfilled, and for whom the mother would be a young wife in the current court. How else could it be a sign to Ahaz? And this is confirmed in a special way by Isaiah himself, for outside of this narrative, in a text composed shortly after the confrontation at the spring, Isaiah refers to the land, Judah and Jerusalem, as belonging to Emmanuel, either because the child has been or will soon be born in it. Chapter 9, composed not much later after the event and after this observation by Isaiah, announces the birth of the child. For a child has been born and a son has been given. It is simply difficult to imagine how this could be somebody other than the birth of Hezekiah, Ahaz's son and heir. And this is the first in a number of times in the Isaiah text that birth and naming of a child is going to be a prophetic symbol of hope. And it attests to a passionate belief on the Isaiah school in the capacity of the Davidic family to produce heirs to the throne and thus to renew the life of Israel. In time, this theme would take on a messianic sense, well before the Christian appropriation, which, like other appropriations, errs only in claiming to own it to the exclusion of others. What is common to the symbol and belongs to us all is the orientation of history to an open future. The narrative is suspended with verse 17 to make way for a theological reflection, a particular characteristic of the prophetic school. These theological reflections have a basic pattern. First comes judgment. The Lord will bring you upon you such and your people, upon the house of your fathers, days that are unlike any since those when Ephraim turned treacherously from Judah, namely the king of Assyria. The Lord will whistle, and the fly will come. And he'll whistle to the bee, and the bee will come. While this intends to be an ending in itself, the making of endings is always difficult. As a latter-day reader, even the author himself has attempted to amend it. So in a clumsy sort of way, someone comes along and clarifies the fly and the bee, who God is summoning to be the elder and the prophet. Clearly the fly is Egypt and irritant, and the bee is Assyria, the sting. The way is open for other authors and other editors to add a series of cameos, as Blenkinsop calls them in his commentary, four in all, which elaborate the disasters of war. All these are likely to have come within the prophetic school, however, as it appears that the prophetic school was not in the habit of publishing their text, but they held on to their text and reworked them in-house, and only sometime late in the 5th century, mid-century, 5th century, did the text as we know it become public. Having such a vivid and detailed record of an event of this order is unusual, if not unique. And for this reason, that it the reason that this has happened is that the prophetic school of Jerusalem identified this particular event as somehow an essential source for them, for their theological reflection, that would allow them to find their way through what they discerned as the unstoppable rise of the Assyrian Empire. By identifying this force as God's will, they transferred their experience that they would live through from a meaningless wave of violence to be endured into a meaningful punishment which would transform them into a future Israel with a world mission. Their challenge was to discern theologically how they needed to change in order to be the faithful community. As the Isaiah editor was creating this narrative, other elements of the Isaiah school were adding additional text material, which was archived and available for its work. In the days following the encounter, waiting gave rise to doubt, just as when will this happen? And to that the young Isaiah responded, and these personal responses of his are archived by the school, and they eventually appear as chapter 8. The school's reflections of this period and of this event keep churning away, and they appear as chapter 9, 10, and 11. In our next section, we'll turn to the reactions of Isaiah in the aftermath of the event. The school preserved them and already located them in chapter 8, where they are for the first time that we hear the actual voice of Isaiah.